Hello, welcome to Stories in Time. My name is Ellouise Schoettler, and I'm a storyteller. With this story I'm going to tell you today, I am collecting memories, putting them together, and working on bringing out a bigger story. Maybe you have some memories of the same thing I'm going to be talking to you about. Who knows? When I was 5 years old, I lived on 9th Street in the Elizabeth section of Charlotte, North Carolina. To the back of 9th Street, about 3 blocks away, was a train. It was the train tracks. And trains were going through there about 4 or 5 times through the night. And so I've always thought of it that that sound and the sound of the whistle was the music, the background music to my life when I lived over there. And I happened to like it a lot. On the other way, I was between 7th Street and the tracks on 9th Street. And at the corner of 7th Street and 9th Street, there was a tall water tower. It was metal going up with a big round bowl at the top of it, and some scary ladders that I used to stand there and stare at and be afraid that one day I might find myself on such a ladder. Well, I knew I never would, but you get those things in your mind. 1941, I was 5 years old, and we were living there. It was a small house. It was a tall house because it had 2 stories. It had a big front porch, narrow, but around the house. And upstairs, near the bedroom where I slept, there was a doorway to another porch that was screened. It was an upstairs sun porch. And now I understand why they had it. There was no air conditioning, and so they had to have a porch that let the cool air in the evenings so that people could get their sleep. My sister and I were the only 2 children at the time, even though my mother was pregnant and expecting a 3rd child. We didn't count that 3rd child yet. There was plenty of room in that house to play, to find little places to play. Up and down the steps. Linda was 2, I was 5. So we were pretty safe. We had a long backyard, but I liked the front yard better, and I'll tell you why. The front yard was right on the street. Sidewalks, and then across the street, sidewalks and more houses. There were big trees planted that had grown so large up and down that street. There weren't many cars coming down that street, except when somebody backed out a car to go to work or turned into their driveway to come home. My mother and daddy did not have a car at that time. They were just young and having children. I liked to go in the front yard because Mama had given me permission to stay on the sidewalk with my tricycle. I had a red tricycle, one of those that has the big wheel in the front and the 2 little wheels in the back. And I would feel so good and so big and so smart when I was riding that bicycle as fast as I could. Not a bicycle, a tricycle. As fast as I could down the sidewalk. I wasn't allowed to cross the street at the end. I had to turn right around and come back. And be careful if there were people on the sidewalk. Watch out, stop, and wait. I loved that. I would have played that every day. That's what made it so pretty there, all the way into the fall, because the trees were dropping their leaves and the color was laying on the sidewalk or on the asphalt of the street. Because I was out riding so often, I knew most everybody on that street that was on the porch, looking out, checking on me, or that was near the sidewalk. Hey, Ellouise, good morning, Mrs. Morgan. And I'd stop and talk to her for a little bit. I knew all those people. It was my small world, and I loved it. I loved it. The next really striking memory that I have of that place happened at Christmas, or before Christmas. We had finished with Thanksgiving, and so the children, of course, I can remember it. I was so excited because this meant that Christmas was coming. There would be a tree, I was sure of that. There would be lights, I was sure of that. I didn't know what we'd eat, and I didn't know what Santa Claus would bring. And that started in my head right after Thanksgiving, which was still November. But the first Sunday that year of December, my grandmother and my grandfather drove the 8 blocks from their house on 7th Street over to us to pick me up so that I could go for a ride with them downtown. Dad Jack went for a ride every Sunday in his car. There was a long seat in the back, and then the long seat for 2 people in the front. There was a radio, and he would turn on the radio. It was a black car. It looked like an official car, and he turned on the radio. And so we got into the car. They told me, you get in the back seat. We didn't have, safety belts to ride at that time. That wasn't done. So I got in the back. I scooched over behind Granny so that I could see what she had in her pocketbook. And she opened it up, and I smelled the juicy fruit chewing gum immediately. And she took out a stick, and then she handed me one over her shoulder. One for you. Don't put the paper on the floor, Ellouise. So I folded it up and put it in my pocket. We started out. We went back up Pecan Avenue, which was going towards 7th Street. 7th Street was a wider street, more cars up there. And it was right at that corner was the A&P. And we turned right because we were going down toward the center of Charlotte. But today it was different. There were more cars on the street, but they were moving slow. Dad Jack said, "Look, Ellie, look at this. This traffic is just going too slow. This is just too slow. I don't understand this." And as we got closer to Hawthorne Lane, where we were getting even closer to the football stadium, he decided he knew exactly what it was. It's the football game. I forgot all about it. It's the football game today. That's why there's so much traffic. But there was something else in the streets. Young boys wearing jackets, and they had their bags on their back, and they had stacks of newspapers up under their arm, and they were calling, "Today's paper, get the paper, get the paper." There was something different. I knew what a newspaper looked like. It was white and black, sort of gray. But these were pink. These were pink newspapers. Finally, one came over to the car and he said, "Mister, you're going to need this paper. It's an important paper." And he took one out and put it to the window, and Dad Jack rolled down the window so he could see. He handed it in, and he turned and he looked at Granny, and he said, Ellie, there's a war on." "There's a war on?" So he pulled over to the side, to the curb, so that he could read what it said there. They could talk about it. They could read. I was just hanging over the back of the seat because I couldn't read. I was just 5 years old. I couldn't read. I could see the pictures, and I could see the colors, that it was different colors, and I didn't know, and they started to talk a little bit. They read, "Pearl Harbor, that's in Hawaii. What are they thinking? What are they thinking at all our ships down? We're at war. Jack, I want you to turn around and go home. I think it's better that we go home now. I want to hear the rest of this on the radio. Maybe there's some man on that radio that's got sense about him and he can tell us what's happening. So they turned around. He pulled into a driveway a couple of streets down, turned around, and the traffic wasn't as slow going home as it had been going toward the city. And he drove, and we came to Pecan Avenue, right at the water tower. And he drove down the 2 blocks, turned, and I hopped out of the car. And I heard her say, Jack, just sit here just a minute. I'm just going to run in and see that Louie and Robert know what's going on. They can get it from the radio. So she was only in the house a few minutes, and she came running back out. We can go now. Ellouise is in there with Louie and Robert. She's fine. And they went on home. I went on the house, and Mother and Daddy had turned on the radio, and it was the newsman talking about what was happening. Well, that didn't interest me, so I went on about my business. But my mother was doing a lot of crying after that. And my father was saying those bad words that he would say when he was mad. And they were nervous. They weren't their same people. They seemed to be nervous. We're at war. That seemed to be scaring these people. We're at war. And all I could think about, what is a war? What is a war? And they would tell me. They would tell me. And that's when things began to change in my life. It began to change when World War II started for us. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a little bit of reliving history. Thank you.